What's going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. Kyle coming to you with our Week 16 quarterback start and sit episode. And if you're watching right now, one of three things is probably true. Number one, you're playing for a fantasy football championship this week. Congratulations on a successful season so far, but we've got one step to go. Let's get you there. Number two, maybe you're still alive and you play for a fantasy football championship next week. Well, if that's the case, email your commissioner right now and let them know that you need to change that because you should be playing in Week 16, not Week 17. And number three, maybe you're just here watching because you love to support the channel and you love to get as much fantasy football knowledge as possible. If that's the case, thanks so much for your support and for coming back even though your season is done. But for last week, Week 15, we had our best week ever collectively as a channel. Up over 70% total for all of our start and sit episodes combined. So a really good week. Jake ended up finishing number 24 in the rankings last week. I finished at 32. So an excellent week here. Hopefully we were able to help get you into the championship. Taking a look at quarterbacks from last week, 69%. Again, our collective percentage was up over 70%. So a really good week for us last week, which hopefully meant a really good week for you last week as well. So without further ado, let's jump into it and let's talk about what we're going to do with some of these quarterbacks here in Week 16. Our first matchup of the week has Houston and Tampa Bay. And for Deshaun Watson, we're starting him. Absolutely 100%. Gets a great matchup against Tampa Bay and has a very high ceiling this week. So if you own Watson, you're in a nice position this week. For Jameis Winston, a lot of owners were concerned about him last week in that hand. Well, it didn't end up bothering him any. Over 200 yards, 2 touchdowns in the first quarter against Detroit. Expect probably not the same statistics, but expect still a lot of volume for him for this week. So he could end up throwing maybe 2 or 3 interceptions, but he could throw 2 to 4 touchdowns. Will throw for about 400 yards. He'll get to the secondary a little bit this week, but again, tons of volume. That's been the name of the game with Jameis Winston. He's provided more than enough fantasy points all season long. Buffalo's going to head to New England in a really nice matchup this coming Sunday. They were able to get through Pittsburgh on the road last week. Can they do the same thing this week against New England? A lot of eyes are going to be on this game, especially Bills fans. They want to see their team get a big dub in New England this week. And for Josh Allen, I'm going to roll with him. Yeah, the Patriots defense was really, really good to begin the season, but they've shown some of those weaknesses here towards the end of the season and hasn't been nearly as good against better opponents. Josh Allen last week, he ended up being a miss, but by less than a point. He ended up having 17, like 0.8 points last week or something like that. It was crazy. But basically, he was 1 rushing yard away from being a hit last week. And I told you at that time, we're going to stop overlooking Josh Allen. We're going to put him in our top 12 basically every week moving forward, even on the road against a tough Steelers defense. Still played decently well. Had a passing touchdown, had a rushing touchdown. If he hadn't thrown that interception as well, that would have been a hit. So I expect him to be a hit in New England this week. And for Tom Brady, I am going to go ahead and pass on Tom Brady this week. Even though it's at home, I'm not going to deal with it. Buffalo has allowed 8 games this year under 200 passing yards. They could end up being very, very tough against Tom Brady again this week. Again, they're a little bit banged up right now. I expect Buffalo to go into New England and potentially take care of business. Now, we're not going to talk about any betting, any wagers or anything like that, but I think Josh Allen's going to have a good enough game to be a hit and a start for you, and Tom Brady's going to have maybe an okay game, but I don't think he gets to those 18 points. Jared Goff has not been great this season, but this week against San Francisco, I'm going to go ahead and roll with him on the road. I think he's a low-end quarterback one. If he gets those 18 points, I think it's going to be just barely. However, San Francisco's dealing with some injuries this week. Will they be a little bit more healthy this week? Still yet to be seen. Still yet to be announced who may be in, who may be out. We'll continue to track that. When I do my rankings, we might adjust those things a little bit. As of right now, Jared Goff is a start for me. For Jimmy Garoppolo, however, I am going to go ahead and sit him this week against the Los Angeles Rams for the main reason that Los Angeles has not allowed 250 passing yards in a game since week 8. Not a whole lot of upside for Jimmy Garoppolo. I think San Francisco ends up taking care of business this week, but The problem with that is I think Jimmy Garoppolo is not going to have a high enough ceiling from a fantasy perspective. He'll be a good quarterback. I think he can lead this team to a win this week. I think he'll have decent stats, but that 18-point mark that we need for him to be a hit, for him to be a start, I don't think he's going to reach that this week. This week, Gardner Minshew will be a start for me. Last week, I ended up having him a sit, even against Oakland. I thought it was a tough matchup on the road. Didn't have a really high ceiling, but this week against Atlanta could potentially happen. So I'm going to go ahead and put him as a start. That 18-point mark for him is going to be very close. For Matt Ryan, we're going to go ahead and throw him in there as well. Performed brilliantly on the road last week against, again, a depleted San Francisco secondary. However, still played extremely well. Now, for Gardner Minshew, Atlanta has allowed the 5th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, so a decent opportunity for him this week. For Matt Ryan, he has at least 2 touchdowns in 3 straight games, and he has over 300 yards in 3 of his last 5. So he's playing really well right now. Even with Calvin Ridley being out, he still has more than enough weapons around him. I think he gets more than enough this week to be a start. Lamar Jackson, we're not sitting Lamar Jackson. Even if you're sitting here thinking that you're worried they could potentially be benched, here in week 16, here in week 16, I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah, it could potentially happen in the second half, but Lamar Jackson's not coming out of the game unless he's already put up a ton of points like he did last week. So you're still going to roll with him this week 100% against Cleveland. And for Baker Mayfield, this team is in absolute disarray right now. I don't expect them to do much of anything against this Baltimore defense. Baltimore wants to go into Cleveland, take care of business, get a win, lock up a division championship, lock up the top seed. They want to get that done this week. If they can get it done this week, then we're looking at maybe week 17 having Lamar Jackson sit. But for right now, we are still rolling with him. This will probably be a really fun matchup with New Orleans and Tennessee. Drew Brees, Ryan Tannehill, both are starts for me. And who would have thought in week 16 that this would be one of the premier quarterback matchups in the NFL this season? Why? Because both of them have been playing lights out. For both of these guys, they are the QB4, Ryan Tannehill, and QB5 for Drew Brees since week 8. Top 5 quarterbacks since week 8. They've been playing really, really well. A marquee matchup. Both of these guys are going to put up more than enough points. Definitely playing both of them this week. Ryan Tannehill is definitely going to be a start for me unless you have one of these upper tier guys. If you have a Drew Brees, if you have a Patrick Mahomes, if you have a Lamar Jackson, something like that, yeah, you're probably not going to try and get cute and put Ryan Tannehill in. But honestly, Ryan Tannehill will be one of my top rated quarterbacks this week. If you don't have any of those top tier guys, you're going to be looking to Ryan Tannehill to really help you bring home that fantasy championship this week. Will Grier and Jacoby Brissett are both going to be sits for me this week. Grier was just announced as the starter for Carolina this week. I don't foresee a ton of upside with him. It's going to be a lot of Christian McCaffrey this week. We might see, especially if Indianapolis can get out in front at all, we might see them pass it a little bit more, but I'm just not seeing enough upside with him this week. I think he looks more towards his tight ends than he does his wide receivers. I'll talk about that on the tight end show a little bit more. For Jacoby Brissett, he just hasn't been that good recently. For Jacoby Brissett, since week 7, he only has one 300-yard game, and he only has one game with multiple touchdowns. Carolina's defense is still going to be pretty good. I expect them to kind of hold Jacoby Brissett down a little bit. They say T.Y. Hilton is going to get maybe some more snaps this week. I still don't believe that he's fully 100% healthy at this point. So with that being said, he's still going to be lacking some weapons to really help that be an explosive offense. Ryan Fitzmagic, man, he has that upside every single week, and he's going to have that upside again this week against the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, we thought these roles might be a little bit reversed at the start of the season. Miami was going to be the team looking at a number 1 pick, not Cincinnati. So Miami, they could get themselves another win this week. Cincinnati might not mind that too much. So Ryan Fitzpatrick, a lot of big upside. Albert Wilson is back. He is healthy. Devontae Parker is back out of that concussion protocol. So both of these guys ended up playing last week, going to play this week. Gives Ryan Fitzpatrick a lot of upside. With Andy Dalton, we're going to stay away from him. Even though it's a really good matchup, he just hasn't played well. 2 touchdowns and 5 interceptions since he came back and was named the starter again. Yeah, there's some upside here, but it's far too risky this week of the season. Not a whole lot to see here in this game. I'm not going to be considering any of these quarterbacks, whether it be Hodges or Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold has done a decent enough job. A lot of us have streamed him here at the very end of the season. This is not a streaming matchup against a really good Steelers defense that was able to kind of hold Josh Allen down at times last week. And with Devlin Hodges, man, he just looked like plain garbage last week, unfortunately. He's been pretty decent leading up to that. If you watch the game on Sunday Night Football, they showed some different graphics. He's got a high QB rating. He's got a high completion percentage. However, a lot of his passes are under 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. They expect these guys, the wide receivers, to really make a lot of moves and a lot of yards after the catch. There's no upside because they're not making a ton of deep passes. Yeah, he hit a couple, but he also threw some really bad interceptions as well. So we're not going to risk it with him here in Week 16. I am going to go ahead and list Dwayne Haskins as a start this week because going up against the Giants, it only takes one play. Terry McLaurin gets away for a huge play. All of a sudden, Dwayne Haskins is looking at himself of having a day of at least 18 fantasy points. He's gotten really close. He was over 19 at one point. So I'm going to go ahead and list him as a start because he's got some big play upside this week. Definitely could see it potentially happening. For Eli Manning, though, just not going to trust it this week. It could end up happening. This could end up being the last couple of games of his career. Definitely wants to try and go out in style. Last week, though, against Miami, 3 interceptions. Not a great day for him. So I'm not going to trust him on the road this week either against Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, Drew Lock is about to go off. He gets the Detroit Lions at home this week, giving up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks right now. We're definitely going to be starting Drew Lock this week. If you are having any injuries or if you need upside, maybe you have a fantasy matchup this week. Again, we've talked about this a lot where you're projected to lose by a lot and you need a high upside play, Drew Lock's your guy. He's going to have a big game this week. Really excited to watch that game. Yes, it's against my Lions. That's all right. I'm rooting for Lock to have a big game this week. For David Blow, though, no, we're not going to trust him on the road against a secondary that's been pretty good this season. Phillip Rivers gets Oakland at home this week, so I'm not nearly as high on that defense when it's on the road than when it's at home. So Phillip Rivers going up against a team giving up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, yeah, I'll run with it this week. Let's give it a shot. If you need a streaming option, he could potentially be a streaming option. But again, the reason I'm listing him as a start is because I think he can get to 18 fantasy points. Not necessarily you need to get crazy with your lineup and sit Aaron Rodgers for Phillip Rivers or anything crazy like that. No, we're not doing that, okay? But I do think he gets to 18 fantasy points. And with Derek, not David Carr, that's right, I got you, Headliner Nation. I just don't see the upside for him this week. He hasn't really had any of that upside this season. He's been okay. He's been just We talked about him on one of our shows this week, and I said he's basically vanilla. Yeah, he's all right at times, but he's not great either. So I'm not going to run with him this week. I don't think he has any of that upside to get to 18 fantasy points. Dak Prescott's dealing with a little bit of an injury right now, and that might scare some of you away, similar to Jameis Winston last week. But Dak Prescott's been far too good this season to put him on the bench, even though it's on the road in Philadelphia. Yeah, the Philadelphia secondary, you can get to them sometimes. You can definitely get to them. Again, a big play or 2 big plays away from really making Dak Prescott's day. This is going to be a hard-fought game. It's going to be a back-and-forth game. I definitely think Dak Prescott can get to those 18 fantasy points. And with Carson Wentz, a guy that I've had listed as a sit recently, I'm going to go with him as a start this week. That might be a little bit of a surprise to some of you because you Philadelphia fans think that I hate you at times, and I don't. I don't hate you, Philadelphia. Don't think that. But with Carson Wentz, I'm going to go ahead and roll with him this week. Over his last 3 games, 901 yards, 8 touchdowns, 1 interception. The one thing, it's against lesser competition. I get it. They're having a lot of injuries right now, but he's still somehow making things work. He's definitely not the problem with this team, people. He is the starting quarterback. He is a good starting quarterback, okay? So don't hate on Carson Wentz. However, from a fantasy perspective, he's been a little bit up and down at times this season. He's still within the top 12 quarterbacks in terms of overall fantasy points, but I definitely think he can get to 18 this week. We're definitely rolling with Russell Wilson this week against an Arizona team that gives up a ton of fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks and the games at home. So that always gives Russell Wilson a little bit of an extra incentive in my books when it comes to ranking him. And then for Kyler Murray, we're going to list him as a start this week too. He just has too much upside every single week in a matchup that he could potentially be trailing the entire time. It's because of that rushing ability. Yes, I've had him listed as a sit a couple of times over the last few weeks because I didn't love the matchup. However, this matchup, even though it's a tough environment, it's not nearly enough for me to sly away from him and say we're not going to roll with Kyler Murray. Definitely, again, I think he might be a little bit lower on the poll in terms of where he ends up hitting it for a starting quarterback this week. He might be the lower end of a QB1 for me because I just don't know if there's enough upside for him. But again, the upside lies within his rushing, and if he can get a decent amount of rushing yards, he should be able to get to 18 fantasy points no matter what. Patrick Mahomes, we're going to be playing him this week. A lot of people were scared off by the snowstorm last week, and it didn't seem to bother him too much. So for this week, even though it's a tough pass defense, we're still going to roll with him. I'm not going to be sitting Patrick Mahomes. You drafted him probably in the second, third, maybe fourth round for a reason. It's championship week. We're not sitting him and getting cute. With Mitchell Trubisky, yeah, he's been a lot better over the second half of the season, but Kansas City's defense is also no joke this year either, so I'm not going to go ahead and try to play Mitchell Trubisky this week against a secondary that's been a little bit overlooked and a little bit undervalued at times. And our final matchup of the week, Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins facing off on Monday Night Football. This is a very meaningful game for these two opponents that are very close to each other in the standings. So who's going to get it done? Well, I'm going to go ahead and put both of them as starts. I don't love it. I think this could definitely turn into being a defensive battle, and both of these quarterbacks could struggle. However, our Aaron Rodgers, I probably give him a little bit more upside this week than I do with Kirk Cousins. Even though Kirk Cousins is at home, Aaron Rodgers is just, he shows up for these type of games, right? I did have him listed as a sit last week, and I hit on that. That was a tough game in that was a tough game in Green Bay against Chicago when the temperatures were below 10 degrees at times. That's a tough matchup for any quarterback. That's why I had him listed as a sit. He only got to about 14 fantasy points, I believe. 18 is the cutoff. However, this week I definitely could see him getting to 18 in a marquee matchup indoors at Minnesota in a game that they have to win to try and keep Minnesota from getting into the playoffs. There you have it, folks. Quarterback start and sit episode is in the books. Good luck this week. Again, if you're playing for a fantasy championship, go get that chip. Bring it home. Let's hear about it in the comments if you can get one this week. If you're playing for it in week 16, don't forget, send that memo to your commissioner. Let them know we're done with week 17 fantasy football championships. And if you're just here hanging out watching the content because you appreciate it, thanks so much. Appreciate you and all your support. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. If you're new here to Headliner Nation, let us know in the comments so we can welcome you. And if you're looking for some extra advice this week and you're coming to this channel for the first time, stick around. I think you're going to like what you see. Thanks so much, Headliner Nation. I'll catch you on the next episode. Have a good one.